Welcome to this webinar. This is a pdfToolbox 11 webinar, and the goal here is to show you as much of the new functionality in pdfToolbox 11 as possible. What I'm going to do is go over all of the features in a very quick and summarized way so that you know what is new and that you can then, if you want to see more of the details, go play with those features yourself with the pdfToolbox 11 download. And at the end of the webinar, I will also tell you where to find more resources, documentation-wise, movie-wise, and so on. And of course, you can always come back to us and ask additional questions. So let's get started by talking just a few seconds about why a new version was important, or perhaps better, what the focus of this new release was. And there are three main things that we focused on. The first one was what we see is more and more that pdfToolbox is used in more complex automation scenarios. And there were a number of things that were missing and that we are enabling with this release. We wanted to make it easier to work with the automated version in the workflow. And likewise, we wanted to make it easier to work with the manual version. There are still plenty of people who are using pdfToolbox desktop and who have built, it's strange to say it that way, but who have their own workflow with the manual version using profiles and process plans and so on. And that definitely was up for some improvement as well. And then the third point sounds a little bit weird perhaps, but what we see is that pdfToolbox is used more and more in particular market segments, and perhaps niche markets for some of these things are too strong because the market is actually bigger than a niche market. But some of those features are really very specific. So don't be surprised if there is some stuff that is not exactly going to be useful in your workflow. We've really tried to fill out this release with features across many different workflows and market segments. So that's to be expected. And then apart from that, there are general improvements throughout the product. You will not see many of the smaller items in this presentation, and you might even argue that I'm skipping some of the somewhat bigger items in here as well, because there simply is too much in this release. So these are the topics we're going to go over. As I said, these are the bigger features in this release. So starting with pdfToolbox desktop itself, if you look at pdfToolbox desktop, you'll see that there is a toolbar, call it a sidebar because it's at the side of this thing. Some people do not like this at all, and there is a hide button at the very top, so you can get rid of it if you don't like it. I like it a lot, especially the section at the bottom to bring up the switchboard profiles, checks, and fixups window. This is something that has been debated for quite a while. I'm personally very happy it is in there. Like I said, if you don't like it, go to hide and click it away. Next up is a pretty specific one, and I can imagine that many of you will not know what this is about. But there is an ISO standard called Dpart metadata, or rather it's part of the PDF 2.0 ISO standard, something called Dpart metadata that comes from document part metadata. And the idea is that in a multi-page PDF file, there are scenarios where you would like to tag pages, individual pages, or page ranges in that PDF. And a good example would be a transactional printing job, a bunch of invoices in one PDF. It might be very useful in a workflow to tag each individual invoice, and an invoice typically can be one page or 2 pages or multiple pages, to tag those pages belonging to each individual invoice with metadata that you can then use to, for example, split the file in different pieces and so on. And pdfToolbox 11, the desktop version, makes it possible to at least identify the fact that there is Dpart information in the document, where you normally will see PDFX tags appear at the bottom of the document. There is now also the possibility that a Dpart tag will pop up, and that then means that there is Dpart information in the file, and there is a Dpart Explorer window that you can bring up for a PDF document that, if the file contains Dpart information, will allow you to see all of that metadata that is there. In this version of pdfToolbox, there really isn't anything to use that information in a creative way, for example, to split a PDF file based on that information. But as a first step, we chose to make that information visible, so you can see what is there and perhaps explore what the possibilities are of having that kind of information in a PDF file. Then another very small item, but I think for many people something that could come in handy, is the fact that there are new place content fixups. So just if you haven't used that in the past, place content is technology that allows you to decorate a PDF document. That's the easiest way of putting it. So when you have a PDF, you might want to add something like a color bar, you might want to add a barcode, you might want to add some text or a stamp or anything like that. And place content allows you to do that. And in the Fixup window on the right side here, you can see that there is a fixup called place content on page, and that is the generic fixup, and that requires creating an HTML template in order to do something. And of course, that's a little bit of a challenge to do, especially the first time. It has a bit of a learning curve. So we also introduced easier fixups like place barcode, place text, and place page number. And in pdfToolbox 11, there are 3 new ones: one to add circles or ellipse shapes to a page, one to add lines, and one to add rectangles. And these things are very often used for things like cut marks or fold lines or little registration marks somewhere on the page. So the fact that you can do this now without having to create an HTML template is, in many contexts, going to be a time saver. So next up, if you have ever worked with a variable profile or process plan, you know that when you run such a thing in pdfToolbox desktop, it brings up an Ask-at-runtime dialog. And the Ask-at-runtime dialog allows you to enter the values that you want to use for any variables in the process plan or profile that you're using. In pdfToolbox 10, this was always a rather or very unattractive dialog window that you couldn't modify and that wasn't very client-friendly to use. In pdfToolbox 11, this dialog can accept a template, and that template allows you to either, if you use the template that is in the product by default, get what you have here on the left of this slide, which is a much nicer looking dialog window, where there was a bit of an upgrade of all the different form fields that you have in here. So that is already very nice, but the template and the fact that you can adjust that template allows you to do something like what you have on the right, where you have a completely different image on there, but where you can also see that instead of requiring the user to type a date in a regular form field, I can actually integrate something like a date picker so that there are no errors in how a date is entered, but a client can just click, whoever uses this can just click on a particular day and enter the information in that way. So creating these templates is not necessarily an easy thing. There is documentation for this, and again, I'll point to that at the end of this webinar. But this gives you at least a way to modify this dialog if this is something that is important to you. And if you build process plans specifically for people to use them in the desktop version, then this should be something that interests you and gives you additional possibilities. I talked about splitting files when we talked about Dpart information, mainly to say that you couldn't use Dpart information to split files. Well, there is a new check that you can use to split files in there. And you can use it for more than that as well. But if you look on the left-hand side of the slide here, you can see that there is a new check that you can make that is called find text, and find text does exactly what it says. It looks at all of the text that you have on a page in a PDF document, and when it finds a particular word that you enter in there, and you can use regular expressions for that as well, when it finds that, it will give you a pre-flight hit. And then there is a new action in the switchboard, but also in the CLI, of course, in the command line version. There is a new action that allows you to split a PDF file into different parts based on the result of a check. So if you know that there is a PDF file that contains a series of invoices, and you know that on the first page of each invoice, it actually has the word invoice, then you could search for the word invoice with this new pre-flight check that finds specific text, and you can split your PDF file so that each invoice is now a separate PDF file. And if you set it up properly in that way, it will work whether the invoice is 1 page or 2 pages or variable depending on the customer. It will just work in that way. It's worth to remark that I see here find text and use it, but of course this splitting the PDF at a particular mark will not only work for find text, but it will also work with other pre-flight checks. So if you rather make a pre-flight check that says look for a particular point size and a particular font or a particular color that is used for text, then those pre-flight checks can be used for this splitting algorithm as well. Okay, a very big topic and something that keeps coming back, and because it is actually very, very difficult to solve completely, is better bleed handling. And to start with that, while pdfToolbox 10 had many different ways of detecting bleed and creating bleed for rectangular jobs, they missed some options. And a lot of those options have been added to pdfToolbox 11. You can see a list in there. I will pick out one. In many cases, when you are creating bleed, it is annoying that, for example, it also creates bleed of the text elements in the file, because mostly what you want is you want the bleed to be created from any background elements, which typically are either vector objects or images, but you don't want to copy any textual content. So there is a way to add an exception for objects specified by a pre-flight check. But there are a lot of other different options for this create bleed that can help you to create the bleed that you actually need in production. And perhaps as an illustration, but also very, very useful, there is a new built-in process plan that is called check and fix bleed, and that process plan is ready-made and will analyze the document using quite intricate scripting in there as well. It will analyze the document, and based on the options that you provide, on the values that you can type in on this dialog window on the right-hand side that will pop up, it will then analyze the document and create bleed for these sides of the page where it's necessary and with the amounts that you specify there. Yeah. So this is a predefined process plan that you can find in the new in version 11 library in pdfToolbox 11. But it doesn't stop there. We didn't just want to improve the bleed creation and detection for rectangular jobs. There is also additional work that has been done to provide the same capabilities for irregular jobs. So if you have a job that is defined by a Dieline or a cut contour, whatever you want to call it in your workflow, then you can now use that cut contour, or if there is no cut contour, you can use the the shape of the objects that you have in this PDF. And there is a new fixup called generate bleed for irregular shapes. You can see that there are lots of different options that you can use for that one, and that new fixup will do something like this. So it will add bleed. It always adds bleed by mirroring, or rather not mirroring, but it takes the last pixel at the cut contour and it stretches that out, which is about the only thing you can do for irregular shapes. It works for things like the circle that you see on here, but it would also work for much more irregular shapes than this. So in many workflows, especially when you think maybe not packaging necessarily, but when you think label, for example, this should be a very nice feature for that. Next up is some additional stuff for barcodes. You know or should know that in pdfToolbox 10, we already had support for adding barcodes to a document, and pdfToolbox has its own barcode library built in with over 100 different types of barcodes that are supported. But what we could not do was detect barcodes or analyze barcodes, and that was also a relatively frequent question. Be aware that this is a version 1 implementation if you want in pdfToolbox 11, and there are still some restrictions in here, but you have a way in either the switchboard or automatically, and I'll come back to that in a second, to do things with barcode. In the switchboard, that means that you can go to the read barcode pane and you can draw a little rectangle with the mouse, for example, across a barcode, and it will give you this overview of information that you see there at the bottom. So in this case, it was a QR code that was scanned, and it gives you both the easy parameters, like where is it on the page and what is the width and the height, but it goes further than that as well, and it can do things like bar width reduction estimates and so on. Yeah. And this manual thing can also be used in an automatic way. There are a number of different properties that you can use, conditions that you can use in a pre-flight check to inspect the value of a barcode, but also, again, to look at what kind of barcode do I have, what is the symbology, what are the other properties of this barcode. And because this is a pre-flight check, you can put it in a profile or a process plan. You can use it in the command line version in the server, wherever you need it. So next up is something that is not in pdfToolbox desktop, but is very specific to pdfToolbox server. For those of you who have not used pdfToolbox server, it is the hot folder processing variant of the pdfToolbox product family. So pdfToolbox server is the product that allows you to set up one or more hot folders, and the files dropped in that hot folder are simply processed. The limitation that you had in a context like that is that a pdfToolbox server hot folder could only process single PDF files, for example, and it doesn't really have, or it didn't really have, a good way of dealing with things like variables. Variables could be set on a hot folder, but then they would be the same for all files inside of that hot folder. You couldn't use different values for the variables for each file. And what you see here are two features that are closely related but still different, that aim to improve that functionality for the hot folder based version of pdfToolbox. The first is Sidecar files. And a Sidecar file, you can see that at the bottom, is a JSON file. JSON is a type of JavaScript file. It's actually JavaScript encoding of a JavaScript object, or a text encoding of a JavaScript object. And that Sidecar file has to be put in the hot folder together with the PDF file. So instead of processing PDF files, you process Sidecar files and PDF files. And that means that the Sidecar file is then processed together with the PDF file by pdfToolbox server, and that Sidecar file can be used to define variables. So if you want to process a PDF file through a hot folder but you also want to pass values for the different variables that are used in the Preflight profile or process plan, then a Sidecar file can be used for this. And because pdfToolbox server also writes information to Sidecar files as they are being processed, you can even use this to transport information between different hot folder setups. So if you build like a cascade where the output folder of the first hot folder setup is the input folder of the second hot folder setup, then you could use Sidecar files to transport information between those different hot folder setups. The second concept is very similar but very different at the same time. In this context, you also work with a JSON file, but it has to have the .job ticket extension. And instead of processing a PDF file and a Sidecar file, you just process the job ticket. And the job ticket then has instructions for where to find the file that needs to be processed, which variables to use, which actions to use on this file, and so on and so on. Yeah? That means that in a job folder context in pdfToolbox server, you are able to enable much more complex processing than you were able to do so before. So in some contexts where something like FileTrain would have had to be used previously, you can get away now with just pdfToolbox server if you have the capability of writing a job ticket or Sidecar, depending on what you want to do, and then feeding those into the hot folder together with the PDF. So, color. Color is always a fun topic, and I picked a few items, not everything that is new, but first of all, if you've worked with Convert Color in the past, you know that this was already let's say, a complex fix-up to set up. It had two tabs, a destination tab where you had to enter some stuff, and then a conversion settings tab. In pdfToolbox 11, there is a third tab called Advanced Settings. This is not necessarily more complex than it was before, quite the contrary. In pdfToolbox 10, if you looked at the destination tab, at the bottom of that destination tab, you would have found a pull-down menu that talked about color policy files. And a policy file was a text file you had to create, or you could create, that contained advanced settings. What we've done in pdfToolbox 11 is we've removed that color policy file setup, and we've made it possible for you to use advanced settings instead of that. So instead of having to make a text file, you now have the ability to add an advanced setting in there, and you can see 4 advanced settings being used here, but there are many more that you could add. And the advantage is you don't have to know what they are, or rather look it up in the documentation, because here you simply have pull-down menus where you can choose, and the values are a pull-down menu as well that you can simply choose. So that makes it a little bit easier already. And the second advantage is that all of these things have the little orange variable triangle next to them. So you can now use also variables for all of these advanced settings. And that was a frequent question. Along the same lines, there are 2 other fix-ups, one called map colors and the other one map spot and process colors, where it was notoriously difficult to set them up with variables. If you wanted to map a large amount of colors to spot, or wanted to map spot colors to other spot colors, it was really difficult to do this, especially in an automated context where you don't know ahead of time how many colors you're going to have and so on. To solve that, there are now 2 new fix-ups. They have the same name, but each time using script variables to the end of the fix-up name. And instead of having a bunch of settings, they only have one setting called parameters. And that takes a bit of JavaScript, it's actually a JSON representation or a JavaScript object that you have in there. So instead of having to configure 1,500 different parameters to set this up in an automated context, you could now, because this also supports variables, you could now simply write or construct a JavaScript object, pass that as a variable to the profile, and these fixups can use that to do processing. And if you've ever looked at processing, for example, a color guide with lots of different spot colors for a customer, to do correct mapping of RGB to spot or CMYK to spot, then this could be a way to make that much more flexible. I've skipped some color fix-up issues that I thought were a little bit smaller, but well, I'll show you at the end, like I said, where you can get some of that additional information as well. Custom pre-flight reports. We've already done quite a bit of work to pdfToolbox version 8, 9, and 10 with pre-flight reports, but this is one of those topics where if we add a feature or a possibility to the product, very quickly people come back and say, oh, but I wanted to do something that was a little bit different, and is there a way to do that? And so in pdfToolbox 11, there are again new capabilities that you can use in your reports. And you can see some examples here. First of all, there are some new report templates that you can use. Secondly, in the report templates, you can do new things. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see a report that contains separation images for all the colors in the document. That is something that you can simply build into a pre-flight report now. And the same with things like multiple images for multiple pages, or preview images for a business card workflow where you have business cards with 2 pages. Or you can do things like what you see at the bottom, where you might want to highlight to the customer what the undercolor white is that is going to be used in a design, or where varnish is going to be applied to a design, or maybe you just want to show the cut contour as well. Those things can be built in there as well. Extract Dielines is something that will be most useful, of course, in workflows like packaging or label or large format where things have to be printed and then they have to be cut. There is a new switchboard action that allows you to extract a Dieline from a PDF file. And that switchboard action takes a pre-flight check. So which objects are part of the cut contour or the Dieline are defined by a pre-flight check. And the format in which you can export that Dieline is either CF2, DXF, or SVG. Yeah? You can do this in the switchboard, but there is also a CLI command, so you can do it in an automated fashion as well. And that, of course, means that if you have something like this, what I had in the previous example, at the bottom there, I have a sticker. That sticker has a Dieline. With this functionality, I could process the sticker and send the print part of that file to a printer, and then use this to export my cut contour as an SVG file or DXF file and send that to a cutting plotter or something like that. Okay, so a very small thing, but for people who use JavaScript in pdfToolbox, probably a little bit more than just a small thing. One of the questions we've had quite a bit is how can you interact from within a pdfToolbox variable, a script variable, to the outside world. And there was already a way of doing that with files. You could, even in pdfToolbox 10, you could read a text file or a JSON file or an XML, and then parse that and do something with that in your profile or process plan. But a recurring question was, well, but I have data in a database, for example, or on a website that I want to query. And what we've done in pdfToolbox 11 is there is, in the JavaScript implementation, there is a new HTTP object that can make a HTTP-based call, a GET command call to be specific. So you can do something like app.http.get and then specify the URL, potentially a timeout if you want. And there is a way to specify additional parameters there as well. All of that is contained in the documentation. So this could be a way to request information from a web-based system, but it could also be a way of getting information out of a database, because many database implementations, if not most, make it possible to get information through REST APIs, just as getting it through regular database connectivity. What is important to note here is that, and this is because of security concerns, it is only possible to get information. So just as with files where you're limited to reading files and then doing something with the content of that file, here you are limited to using get commands to request information than to use it inside of your profile or process plan. Okay. Something that is a little bit different, and I'm saving two very big features for the end. The first one is Spotify, and Spotify is a convert to spot color, but a specific one. There are some environments, think of things like pad printing, screen printing in some cases when you want to convert a file for processing in a textile workflow, you might encounter the same thing. There are workflows where you can only deal with spot color files, and where the spot colors cannot be mixed, and where each spot color has to be used at 100% tint. And in those environments, there is a new feature called Spotify that allows you to do that. A good example is, if you look at this file, this is something that originally was a RGB-based JPEG file. So if you would look at the PDF, then it is actually an RGB JPEG image that is in there. If I look at separations, I'm seeing it as CMYK in this case. So I've already converted it to CMYK. But now I can use Spotify, and the Spotify has many different options that you can set, but in the switchboard, there is a very simple, easy to use implementation where the only thing you do is specify the number of spot colors that you want in the output and whether or not to use a spot color library, and if so, which library. So if I do this conversion of this file to a spot-based file and I say don't use library, then what I'm going to end up with is a file that contains now 3 spot colors, and you can see them on the right-hand side in the list of color patches. I told you this was an RGB file that was only CMYK because of the preview that I had. So this file has been converted into 3 spot colors where the alternate color space is an RGB value, and the name of the spot colors has automatically been crafted according to the RGB values that were used in the document. The advantage of this, of course, is that if I would compare this file, the original in RGB, with this file, visually there would not be a difference. This file only contains 3 colors, so now I have a spot-based version that is visually exactly identical to my input. If, however, here I would say use spot color library, and we ship one example spot color library with CSS colors in there, if I would select that option, then what pdfToolbox is going to do is it's going to still create a file with 3 spot colors, but if I switch back and forth, hopefully you can also see that there is now some color difference. Why is there a color difference? Because in this spot color library, I have specific colors, and I'm telling Spotify to only use those specific spot colors. And so what Spotify does in this case is it looks at the colors it has in the file and it searches for the closest spot color, visually closest, to what it found in the original file. And of course, unless there is an exact match in your spot color library, that is going to lead to some color difference between the original and the processed file, because it will always map to colors that exist in this spot color library. And of course, you can make your own spot color libraries and add them and use those in Spotify. It doesn't have to be the one that is shipped with here. And of course, this can also be done in the automated version of pdfToolbox. In fact, there is a lot more power and intelligence in this feature. There is a Spotify Explorer window where you can play with all the settings, and where you, in a manual workflow, could see, does this work best if I ask for 3 spot colors, or do I need 4 or 5? And what is the result when I do so? How do they visually look? So there is a lot of intelligence that is built into this feature. That brings us to the last feature on the list, at least the last one that I am going to talk about, which is process plan improvements. For those of you who don't know what a process plan is a sequence of steps you want to run on a PDF document. And the advantage is that these steps will be done in the specific order that you define them in. And secondly, that you can do conditional processing. So you can use the result of step 1 to determine whether the next step is going to be step 2 or step 7. This is a really powerful concept. When we invented it a number of pdfToolbox versions back, the idea was that people would build process plans with a couple of steps in it and it would be great. Instead, people build process plans that have 20, 30 or more steps. And while this is very powerful, the way to edit that in pdfToolbox was a little bit of a pain. So you see an example here of that UI. So you had the different steps that you could add there at the bottom, and then you have the steps that were constructed in this process plan at the bottom there, and you can see it becomes a very long list, and it becomes a little bit difficult to move item number 10 to item number 1. In pdfToolbox 11, there is a completely new UI for that will make it much easier to deal with that. As you can see, it's much more flow-based, and it gives you a much nicer overview of a process plan. You can zoom in and out. It is much easier to now add an additional step somewhere in the middle of this. It is much easier to see where the next step is going to be on success or on error, for example, because you have these arrows running from one to the other. So this is mostly with the same capabilities. There is one additional step that you can choose here to rename a PDF file in pdfToolbox 11, but mostly with the same capabilities. This is still a much nicer user interface than what was available in version 10. So that is the list of features that I wanted to go over. Let me, before we end here, point you to where you can find more information. Well, first of all, there is pdfToolbox documentation. I am always amazed that there are still people who don't know that. You can go to help.callassoftware.com, and that brings you to the main documentation page. The URL that you can see on my slide is not the main page, but is the specific page for the pdfToolbox 11 manual. So the way Callas does this is by having a pdfToolbox manual that describes all of the features. But when there is a major new release, there will be a specific documentation manual for that new release. So that is the URL that goes directly to that manual that you have for pdfToolbox 11. So there is a lot more information there for all of these new features in there. The other thing, and maybe even better in terms of information than the manual, is the Callas YouTube channel. And let me try to advertise this again. We've done this in the past, and there are still people who could benefit from this and aren't on there. There are 2 YouTube channels you really should subscribe to if you're interested in pdfToolbox technology. And that is, on the one hand, the channel from Callas itself. If you search for Callas software, then you will find that. Don't just search for Callas, or you will find the opera singer. So search for Callas software, you'll find the Callas software channel. And the other, of course, is the channel from 4Ps itself. And you can find that by simply searching for 4Ps. Subscribe to those. There are lots of interesting videos on there, and we will continue to post new content on there as well. Now, in this context of pdfToolbox 11, what is the most important point is that there is a playlist that you can find on the Callas software channel, and that playlist is called VIP Event 2019. That is the yearly event we have, and at that event pdfToolbox 11 was introduced. So the videos that you have there are recordings of all the sessions from this VIP event, and those sessions to a high degree talk about pdfToolbox 11. So if you want to know more about Spotify, you want to see Olaf from Callas explain how Spotify was developed, how you can configure it, what all the advanced settings are. If you want to know more about custom Preflight profiles or this Ask-at-runtime dialog or any of these features, really, then just go to the playlist and look at all the videos there. There's about, I think, 9 or 10 hours of recordings on there that you can see. Of course, pdfToolbox has been out for a little bit already, so you can download a demo version of the product and play with that. And of course, there is nothing that should stop you from talking to us as well. You can always write me email. I think, yes, my email address you can find on the bottom of the slide there. We also have support email addresses, of course, support@callassoftware.com or support@4ps.com, where you can ask questions. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say. Let me see if there are any questions that have not been answered yet. There is one question about compatibility between 10 and 11. Yes, everything that you make in version 10 should be recognized in version 11 and should just work in version 11. If that is not the case, or you see something that is strange when you go from version 10 or 11, please report to support, because that sounds like a bug. So if you encounter something like that, please let us know. But there is, I always forget whether it's forward or backward compatibility, but if you have something in version 10, it should work in version 11 without any problem. Something about the decorate action, place content. In the switchboard has place image. I could not find image in the fixups. That is correct. There is no fixup that is called that way. You would either need to use place content and write your own HTML template, or, and this is something that not everybody knows or realizes, if you use place content, you have to select a folder with a template in it, and usually that's a folder with an HTML template in it. That is not necessarily the case. You can use place content and point it to a folder that has just one PNG or JPEG or PDF or SVG or anything like that, and that will work as well. And then you can use the parameters of the place content fixup to tell pdfToolbox where it should position the image and so on. Yeah. For something that doesn't solve all problems, for some things, especially when you start also wanting to control the size of the image that is being placed and so on, or you want to modify something based on the size of the incoming file, for some things you will still need to write an HTML template and then use it with place content. But remember that place content, you can also point it to a folder that just has one PNG or one PDF, and it will place that on the document. And that's usually a very quick way of using that. Okay, I think that's all the questions that I can see here. Have fun playing with pdfToolbox 11, and I am sure I will see you again in an upcoming webinar. Have a great day.